Hey guys, Christian. This is going to be an update video for a video I did previously called What the DC Universe Needs to Do. And in that video I went through all the upcoming DC Universe movies and TV shows and gave my theories on how they can all fit into the new DCU continuity. And since we got a bunch of updates from those movies and TV shows, I thought this would be the perfect time for an update video. So without further ado, let's get started with Superman. This is probably my most anticipated movie in the new DCU, just based on everything that we've seen so far as promotion, everything like that. You know, it just gets me really excited for it. And yeah, I know that James Gunn is going to do a really good job since everything's kind of hinging on this movie being really good. And so far, everything that James Gunn has touched has been amazing. So I have complete confidence that it's going to be really good. So yeah, July can't come soon enough. But yeah, just to go into the premise, this isn't going to be an origin story for Superman, which I think is a good call. You know, we can kind of just get right into the action and see what kind of threat that Clark Kent / Superman faces. And with this story, it's supposed to be about Superman reconciling with his two different parentages, one with his Kryptonian side and his other with his human side, you know, being raised by Ma and Pa Kent. So I think that could be really cool. And then also interacting with characters like Lois Lane and the Daily Planet. So I'm glad that they're kind of embracing more of the Clark Kent side and more of the Daily Planet side, because we didn't really get that in Man of Steel. We got like brief glimpses in Batman vs Superman and then maybe a little bit of Man of Steel, but not really too much with him embracing his human side. It's really more of just like his alien side, which is kind of a bummer. So I'm kind of glad that they're bringing it back to kind of like the Christopher Reeves Superman, you know, the bumbling Clark Kent and everything, you know, balancing his identity with Superman and seeing that kind of opposition that he has within, you know, his own identity. So I think that could be really cool. And I think what was really cool is that Peter Safran was describing Superman as kind of like the embodiment of truth, justice in the American way, and that he's kindness in a world where kindness is kind of old-fashioned. And I think that's kind of just what we need in the world right now, just kindness in general. You know, just this world just very like dark and divided and just conflict towards each other. So just having like a symbol like Superman brought into this new DCU and just into the world in general, I think is definitely a positive thing. So yeah, I'm really excited for this character to kind of embrace his kindness and embrace his positivity and not have to be all dark and brooding like the Zack Snyderverse, but kind of bringing this more kind of positive spin on Superman. You know, something that we've seen in the comics and something that we've seen in the kind of Christopher Reeve Superman. And speaking of which, I know this movie is going to be sort of based on the All-Star Superman comic run by Grant Morris and Frank Quitely. And I read up on that story, and I know that James Gunn isn't going to take specific references to that storyline, because in that story, Superman's greatest challenge is that he's facing the threat of death. He gets into an altercation with Lex Luthor and gets overexposed to the sun's rays, so the sun's rays start killing him in a way, and he wants his final act to be kind of like a spin on the 12 trials of Hercules. So this is like the 12 trials of Superman, in order to feel like he's fully fulfilled before, you know, eventually dying. So I'm pretty sure they're not going to go that way with this movie of Superman, but I think James Gunn was really just trying to emulate the tone of that story and, you know, kind of like more of like the positivity and, you know, like the cheesiness, but kind of embracing it in a way. So I think that could be really fun for sure. And back in November of 2022, it was revealed that James Gunn was already writing a Superman movie, and I'm sure he was probably writing a Superman movie for the DCEU, which is probably going to be like a sequel to Man of Steel that we were supposed to get like way back in the day, but yeah, it just never really happened. But I'm sure like once he actually got hired to be the new head of DC Studios and kind of form the new DCU, kind of rewrote it in a way in order to be kind of like the launching point of the new DCU. So Henry Cavill was not asked to return, and he kind of wiped the slate clean of the DCEU and then used it as a launching point for the new DCU, which totally makes sense because I know he wanted to have this story be based on a younger Superman, and obviously Henry Cavill couldn't fit that bill. So yeah, it totally makes sense that Superman would be recast as a new actor, now played by David Cornsweet, which I haven't really seen anything that he's been in before, but he definitely looks the part of Superman. You know, just seeing him in the trailer and the promotional art, you know, he definitely, you know, has the straw jawline and, you know, like the hair and everything. You know, when it's gelled back in Superman, he has that one curl that comes down, so he definitely has that kind of like classic Clark Kent / Superman feel. So I think he'll fit the role really well. And we also have Rachel Brosnahan, who will be playing Lois Lane. And I haven't seen The Marvelous Miss Maisel, but I do have it in my queue on Amazon Prime, so hopefully I'll be able to watch that before watching the new Superman movie just to see how she is. But, you know, based on the trailer, she definitely embodies that kind of like Margot Kidder feel from the original Superman movie and a little bit of the Amy Adams attitude from Man of Steel. So I think she could be really good for sure. And just as far as continuity, James Gunn and Peter Safran said that this is pretty much the true beginning of the DCU, which totally makes sense just because I know that Creature Commandos is really supposed to be part of the DCEU and a spinoff of Peacemaker. But then after James Gunn and Peter Safran got hired to run DC Studios, he kind of reworked it to be the beginning of his new DCU. But I know that was supposed to be kind of like an appetizer for the larger DCU, and that Superman is supposed to be like the true beginning of the DCU, and that this movie is supposed to take place after the events of Creature Commandos superheroes. So I'm sure once we see Frank Grillo as Rick Flag Sr., who was confirmed to be in this movie, it'll probably be like after, he got out of the hospital, after his battle with Clayface. And, I'm not sure like what capacity his role will be, but I'm sure maybe there'll be like a post-credit scene at the end where maybe he gets recruited by Rick Flag or Amanda Waller and then gets word about this kind of oncoming threat to the DCU. So I think that could be interesting. I think another interesting point is that, once again, this isn't an origin story, and that this is supposed to be like Superman, maybe like year 2 of him being Superman, and that how there's already other heroes within the DCU as well. We get Mr. Terrific, we get Hawk Girl, we get the Guy Gardner version of Green Lantern, which we see all of them in the trailer. So I think that'll be really interesting, seeing how these characters kind of interact with each other. Is it going to kind of be like the Avengers, where like Avengers Phase 2, where all the heroes are already established and they're kind of working together, but they're also kind of like doing their own thing. So it'd be interesting how James Gunn explains all that, how we're already kind of living in a world of superheroes and how the kind of like the world interacts with them and everything. So we'll see what he does with that, but I think that could be really interesting, not having to worry about an origin story, just have the characters just be who they are and just live in a world of superheroes. And we're also going to be introduced to a couple characters from the Authority, which we'll get to in a second. So I guess this will be like their introduction to the DCU, and then they'll kind of spin off in their own film later on. So I think that could be really interesting too. Yeah, I think overall it's just really interesting to have a new kind of superhero series with the heroes already established and not worry about how each character kind of has their origin story and how they all kind of come together and how they'll kind of like spin off again and then come together again. So like I said earlier, I think it'll be really interesting to see how James Gunn brings us into a world that's already established with superheroes. So I think that'd be really cool. And finally, we got a bunch of promotional material for the movie. Back in the day, we got that first image of David Cornsweet in the new costume, putting on the boot, and then in the background we see like kind of like alien jellyfish thing shooting a laser in the background. So just to show like his different parts of his costume and how each different part of his costume is kind of taking inspiration from different comic books. So I think it's really cool. He kind of has the collar, he has the gold S emblem on his cape, he has the trunks again, so which I don't really care for, but I actually kind of prefer the Man of Steel version where he's kind of like trunkless and it's just kind of like the blue leotard all the way through. But I know, again, James Gunn's trying to embrace the cheesiness of it all, and he was trying to show that Superman didn't want the people of Metropolis and the world to be afraid of him, so he kind of had to embrace all the cheesiness. And kind of, I guess, speaking of cheesiness, we have the character of Crypto the Superdog. We got another reveal of that. It's for like an adopt a pet day or something, and it shows like Superman and Crypto next to each other looking down at the planets and everything. So I think that'd be really cool. Like at first, I didn't really care for Crypto that much. I remember watching the cartoon like Crypto the Superdog and not really taking it super seriously and everything. But again, James Gunn's trying to embrace the cheesiness of it all and like try to make it grounded and serious. So I was kind of like, okay, I guess I'll go along with it. We'll see how it goes. But then eventually we got that motion poster of Superman flying up, and then we get the catchphrase saying "look up." So I think that'd be really cool. Embracing the whole kind of like, look up in the sky, it's a bird, it's a plane, it's Superman. And then also obviously look up as in gotta be positive, like look up, there's hope out there. I think that was really cool for sure. And then with the kind of slowed down John Williams theme from the original Superman back in 1978, thought that was really cool. And then finally we got the new trailer, which is, oh my goodness, that was like literally one of the best trailers I've seen in my entire life. And it's kind of like the reason why this is like my most anticipated film of 2025. I know there's a lot of Marvel movies out there that are coming out too, and other movies that I'm excited for, but this trailer just made this movie just go at the top of my list for sure. So just starting off, in the snow, and you see like the wind blowing it, and you don't really know what's going on. It's very atmospheric, and then suddenly Superman crashing down into the snow, and then kind of like all like crumbled up and everything, beaten up, scratched up, scarred, and then we hear the just him breathing and everything like that. And then, we kind of get flashes of, him as Clark Kent, which I thought was really fun, seeing like the mushroom hair and the glasses and the large suit and everything that doesn't really fit him, and kind of going through the crowd and bumbling through and going like, oh, I'm sorry. And going to the Daily Planet, thought it was really cool. Yeah, and just showing like different clips of, him as Clark Kent, not only in the Daily Planet, but also just like in Kansas with Pa Kent. And then we kind of just get right into it, like from James Gunn, the title card. We get the cool music, kind of like the slowed down version of the Superman theme on the guitar, very Top Gun Maverick kind of like score to it. Cut back to Superman in the snow, he whistles, and then we see this giant bloom of snow kind of ruffling, and then people are wondering like, who is that? It's gonna be a Supergirl or something. And then suddenly we see Crypto the Superdog come in, and at first I was kind of like, oh, but then once you see that cute little face and Superman putting up his cape and saying, home, take me home, and then Crypto putting his mouth and dragging him across the snow, I was like, okay, I'm embracing this character. I really love Crypto, and I know James Gunn is a huge dog advocate. He has a couple dogs himself. So, he's going to put a lot of love into this character and make us care. We saw Cosmo, the cosmonaut dog in Guardians of the Galaxy movies. So, of course, he's going to have a dog in this one and have us care about it. So I thought that was really cool. But yeah, then we just get into like all the different action shots. We get into like Superman saving people, which is something that we kind of miss from the Man of Steel movies, is like Superman directly saving people. We see the kaiju coming down and like those barrels exploding everywhere, and then him kind of embracing the girl, trying to save her from all the debris. The fact that we got a giant kaiju monster in this movie is pretty crazy. So that's going to be fun to see. We see the different heroes that are helping out, Hawk Girl, Mr. Terrific, Guy Gardner. We see Superman kind of like walking through the crowd and people like either hating him or loving him. People were hating him, like throwing cans to the back of his head, and him kind of just looking very just somber and just like what did I just do? So interesting to see like what is the reason for all that. Obviously we see people who love him. You see the little boy during that crowded chaos scene, him like planting the flag and putting it up that has the Superman symbol flying in the breeze and going like, Superman. Like I got kind of teary-eyed at that because as a dad watching that, I just got emotional. I just was thinking about my own son, trying to be like a hero to him, and maybe him watching these movies and finding inspiration in Superman. I thought that was really cool. But yeah, we just get like different like touch of action and everything. We get Lex Luthor played by Nicholas Hoult, who looks really cool with his shaved head, looking all jealous of Superman and everything, with his gun, probably with a kryptonite bullet in it or something, looking like a James Bond villain. We obviously get more shots of Lois Lane, her and Clark Kent's budding romance. Looks really cool. But yeah, just like overall the trailer is just really good, really emotional, action-packed, colorful, just look very positive and everything. All the theories are going on of like what's going to happen in this story, and the music of course was really amazing as well. But yeah, it just gets me more excited about this movie, and yeah, it just gives me hope for the DCU, and I'm sure with James Gunn at the helm, it's going to be really, really cool. But yeah, overall, great trailer, and yeah, I'm excited to see what happens with the future of the DCU and how Superman is kind of like at the helm to kind of get us started within it. So yeah, I'm really excited for it for sure. And we actually got a bunch of updates for Superman. Back in February of this year, Rachel Brosnahan revealed that she consulted a bunch of journalists to help portray Lois Lane as a modern reporter, and as a way to contrast the character's original comic book appearances and previous screen portrayals, which I think totally makes sense just based on how she is in the trailers. It just seems like she's trying to portray some more realism with her character. I thought Margot Kidder was great, and I thought Amy Adams was great too, but they definitely fit more in the tones of those different movies. I'm sure Rachel Brosnahan is trying to do a more realistic and modern take on the characters, so I'm actually pretty excited to see what she does with it. And then also back in February of this year, Nicholas Hoult revealed that Lex Luthor pretty much hates Superman because he has the power to do anything and he doesn't align with Lex's beliefs. So I think that's going to be really cool. But I know that James Gunn was saying that he wants this Lex Luthor to just be pure evil. He doesn't have some kind of like, real estate scheme like in the original movies or some kind of global domination plot, at least as far as we know. But he's just straight up jealous of Superman for the fact that he can do anything and that Lex is just a normal human being and that he's very limited. So it's going to be interesting to see how he portrays his character and how his character evolves throughout the story. And then back in March of this year, Nathan Fillion described Guy Gardner as being a fearless jerk who's overconfident, which totally makes sense just based on how he is in the trailer. There's like that one shot of him like walking through the battle scene and he kind of just waves his hand, and then the giant Green Lantern hand comes and like whacks all those different soldiers and everything. So it's going to be interesting. I'm kind of reminded of his character in Dr. Horrible's sing-along blog, Captain Hammer being that kind of overconfident jerk and everything, where yes, he's saving people, but he's kind of doing it in a jerky way. So it's going to be interesting to see his portrayal in the movie itself. And then back in April of this year, David Gordon Sweat did a huge interview where he revealed a lot of things about the character and about the movie itself. He said that in the movie, Clark Kent is becoming a successful journalist and superhero, but then new elements of his life leave him unbalanced. And I'm pretty sure that's going to have something to do with his relationship with Lois Lane, where especially in the trailer, it just kind of starts off with Lois giving the interview to Clark, or I guess in this case, Superman, and then, him starting to kind of get riled up and kind of being kind of put on edge and put on the spot. I'm sure that's going to start to create some imbalance in his life. Whereas Clark Kent, he's trying to be a successful journalist, but then he starts to have this kind of budding romance for Lois Lane, and maybe that kind of starts to distract him from his duties as a journalist. And then on the flip side, as he's kind of opening up and revealing his identity as him actually being Superman to Lois Lane, that's going to start to create some imbalance in his life where Lois is kind of constantly challenging him and kind of sort of guilt tripping him in a way for, not checking in with the president before he kind of swoops in, tries to save the day from like a war and everything. So I think it's going to be really interesting to see how that's being portrayed in the movie itself. And then kind of going off of that, he also said that he's madly in love with Lois Lane. And he also said that he's trying to make friends with other superheroes who think he's naive. So not only does he feel kind of out of place at the Daily Planet, but he also feels out of place as Superman amongst the other superheroes. And I'm sure that's going to include Hawk Girl and Guy Gardner and Mr. Terrific, who I guess have been revealed to be the new Justice League. So I think that'll be interesting. How the Justice League are kind of like the official, government sanctioned superhero team. And then Superman is kind of like this rogue superhero who's just trying to join them this whole time, but they keep like putting him down and everything. So it's going to be interesting seeing that whole dynamic and that whole conflict. And I'm sure eventually, Superman's going to save the day at the end, and then he's gonna like join the Justice League. So it's gonna be interesting to see like what trials he has to go through in order to prove himself to the Justice League and eventually be able to join the team and see what the future is for the DCU. And David said that the film kind of shows how these elements kind of impact Clark's choices and values, which are flawed and put him on a personal journey. So kind of like what I've been saying earlier about how all these elements kind of affect Clark's life, not only as Clark Kent, but also as Superman. It's going to be really interesting to see how James Gunn kind of explores all these themes, within this story, and to see how Superman resolves all these issues and eventually, hopefully, becomes balanced at the end, and see what his role is in the larger DCU. He also revealed that Lois Lane isn't too sure about him and needs to be convinced about being in a relationship with him, which we haven't really seen in the trailers, but we know that eventually they are going to be in a relationship with each other, and we'll see like how kind of Clark Kent kind of opens up to Lois Lane, and obviously he's going to reveal himself as being Superman, and that's going to be an element to it. But it's going to be interesting to see like those earlier scenes of him as like the nerdy Clark Kent, and how he kind of like catches Lois Lane's eye and what she kind of sees in him, and how he kind of proves himself eventually, not only as Clark Kent but also as Superman, and how Lois kind of continues to challenge him as Superman and kind of call him out on all his choices, and then figure out kind of like what it really means to be a hero, and kind of working together with people and not just acting on your own impulses. So that'll definitely be interesting to explore for sure. He also talked about the character of Crypto and how he's primarily created by visual effects, which is something that we kind of already knew. And actually back in May of this year, it was revealed that he was 3D modeled after James Gunn's dog Ozu, which I know is a huge inspiration for the character of Crypto, especially the way that he acts like a real life dog. I also know that at times they use an actual dog for a reference on set so that David could have something to interact with. And then also in the interview, David also said that James Gunn actually contacted all the actors to inform them of their casting, and that he offered the role of Superman to David on the condition that he treat the crew with kindness and respect, and citing his experiences with Chris Pratt on Guardians of the Galaxy and John Cena on Peacemaker. So I thought that was pretty interesting, the fact that James Gunn is really taking this version of Superman seriously, and that he wants David Cornsweet to not only portray Superman, on screen as, kind and respectful, but also just how he is as a person and as an actor on set. So I thought that was really interesting, kind of a bit of method acting there, and just a way of just having good morale around the crew, making this movie. It just seems like from all the behind the scenes videos and photos that we've been getting, that this crew just really cares about this project and really wants to be the best movie that it can be, and that not only do they want to portray kindness and respect in the movie itself, but also just amongst the crew members and like the making of the movie. So I thought that was really cool. And lastly, David also revealed that he and Rachel Brosnahan actually filmed a 12-minute interview scene, which James Gunn described as 10% of the film that they filmed over 2 days, and highlighted that the chemistry between the two actors was palpable, which totally makes sense, kind of like what I was saying earlier about how the new trailer just starts off with the whole interview with Lois Lane and Superman, how it starts off kind of like casual and friendly, and then how it kind of builds and builds to be more intense. So it's going to be interesting to see if it actually ends up being 12 minutes of the movie, or if our theories are they're kind of keep cutting back and forth between the interview and then actually showing the scenes themselves of like what they're talking about. So that'd be really interesting. Something that we didn't really get a lot, especially not with the Zack Snyder versions. And we got a little bit of it with the Christopher Reeve versions where Lois Lane is interviewing Superman, but that was only like a couple minutes scene. It was definitely more of like romantic comedy kind of scene. But with this version, it seems like it's going to be more like, yeah, there's going to be romance and there's going to be some cute moments here and there, but it's definitely going to like become more and more intense, more dramatic. So I'm definitely looking forward to seeing it, and we'll see how it actually unfolds in the movie itself. And then back in April of this year, David Cornsweet did another interview where he differentiated the role between Clark Kent's interaction with his parents, his job at the Daily Planet, and with Superman. And he described Superman as being a public-facing character who wants to present himself as calm with authority, and how he drew inspiration for Clark Kent from the comic book All-Star Superman from Grant Morrison and Frank Quitely, and the posture from the Christopher Reeve Superman movies. And another fun fact is that the inspiration for Clark's voice and demeanor was actually from his brother-in-law, who he described as the quietest and most wonderful man, even though he was like 6'8" and 270 pounds. And he also described Clark as being a big presence who's desperately trying to be as small and as quiet as possible. So again, kind of like what I was saying before about how much David Cornsweet and James Gunn are really putting into this character. James Gunn on the writing side when it comes to Clark Kent's interactions with his parents and his colleagues and with other superheroes, and then all the inspiration that David Cornsweet is putting into his performance as Superman just makes me even more excited to see what his portrayal is going to be, and to see like how he interacts with different characters. Just because we have so many characters in this, it's going to be interesting to see like how Clark kind of changes his personality just based on who he's talking to. We kind of get more into that kind of like identity crisis he has with himself. So I'm definitely excited to see what James Gunn and David Cornsweet have in store for this character. Also, James Gunn revealed that the 1940 film His Girl Friday was a major reference for him in how he depicts the relationship between Clark and Lois, and how they're equal matches for each other in a longing romance. And he also said that the witty comedy was inspired by the works of Preston Sturges. And I unfortunately haven't seen those movies, but I kind of know the tone that he's going for, those kind of like 1940s rom-coms and everything. So I'm actually excited to see how he brings that kind of inspiration into this kind of modern context when it comes to relationship between Clark Kent and Lois Lane. And I'm sure we're probably going to get a lot of that, especially in the earlier scenes where Clark is kind of like, the bumbling reporter, and he's trying to impress Lois Lane, who's kind of like this confident, overachieving reporter. I'm sure they're going to start off as like acquaintances, then become friends, and then eventually become lovers. and I'm sure all those kind of inspirations from all those kind of 1940s, rom-coms are definitely gonna trickle into this relationship. So I'm excited to see that for sure. Also back in April this year, James Gunn, David Corenswet, Rachel Brosnahan, and Nicholas Hoult promoted the film during the Warner Brothers panel at CinemaCon, where an extended sequence and behind-the-scenes footage was shown. And jumping right into it with the extended footage, it looked really fun. It's kind of like an extended version of the teaser trailer that we got of Superman crashing down in the middle of the snow, and then whistling, and then Krypto coming to his rescue, and then he's just really excited to see Superman. He's like bouncing on top of him, and Superman's obviously in pain from the battle that he was just in previously. He's like, oh my gosh, stop it. So I thought that was really, really funny. And Superman offering his cape and going like, home, take me home. And Krypto grabbing onto him and playing with the snow. And they eventually get to the Fortress of Solitude, and then like crystals kind of shoot up from the ground. Then meet with the android characters 4, 5, and 12 were actually revealed to be voiced by Alan Tudyk, Michael Rooker, and Grace Chan. I thought it was really funny hearing Alec Tudyk's voice because it definitely reminded me of K2SO's voice in Rogue One. So it's funny that he's playing like another proper British android characters. But then they kind of strap him down to the chair, and they kind of open up the window, and that kind of like this magnifying glass point at Superman so that he can be restored. Definitely reference to All-Star Superman, where Superman is affected by the sun to kind of restore himself. So I thought that was really interesting. And then it kind of goes into like the trailer that we've seen previously with a couple shots here and there that were new. But yeah, I definitely really loved it for sure. And then going into the behind the scenes footage, kind of showing like the actors in costume, and then kind of describing their characters and describing the world. And then James Gunn and Peter Safran talking about how like they didn't really have an angle to approach the Superman movie, but then James Gunn eventually found his in with the character, and then everything kind of went from there. And how Peter Safran was talking about all the love that James Gunn's putting into this movie, and just seeing like all the sets and the costumes and all the practical effects that are going on. Definitely seems like there's just going to be a lot of love put in this movie, and it just gets to be more excited for when the movie actually comes out. And all the actors describing their characters and describing James Gunn and all the love that he's putting into it and all the care that he's putting in it. It just seems like there's just a lot of like positivity around this movie, not only like the making of the movie but also the movie itself. So it just gets me more excited for it, and I just can't wait to see like the fruits of their labor on the screen. And the behind the scenes footage was actually released on Superman Day, coinciding with Superman's debut in Action Comics #1. So I thought that was really cool. And then back in May of this year, Nicholas Hoult revealed that Lex Luthor is motivated by different emotions, including the need to be recognized as a scientific genius. So kind of going back way earlier of what I talked about with Nicholas Hoult talking about how he doesn't want to have like this kind of world dominating plan, but he really just wants people to recognize him as a scientific genius. And it definitely seems like based on trailers, he's in charge of Luthor Corp, and he's kind of like this tech mogul in a way, and he's kind of selling all these different bits of technology. So it'll be interesting to see like how far he goes to bring Superman down, and how he kind of rises to the occasion of being like that big bad that we always see from the comic books. But he also said that outside the comic books, he said he wanted to avoid basing Lex Luthor on historical tech billionaires, except for Steve Jobs when it comes to Lex's uniform, which I can totally see Lex Luthor being kind of like a Steve Jobs kind of character, at least as far as his appearance is. But we'll see how he portrays him when the movie actually comes out. And then finally on May 13th, we got a brand new poster, and the next day we got a new trailer, which both look epic and amazing. And just starting off with the poster, it definitely continues that vibe of positivity and hope. Superman, with his arms crossed, kind of like looking up with a smile on his face, and it's like very colorful and bright. It just kind of continues the tone that we're getting from like the previous trailers and previous media, representing that kind of Christopher Reeve positive Superman, the one that we need, and definitely contrasting with what we got previously with Zack Snyder's Man of Steel. So I'm glad that we're getting more positive Superman, and one who's hopeful and one who's positive, and one that we could like look up to for inspiration, and feel like we can kind of get through all of our problems here. So the poster definitely looks good for sure. And then just going with the trailer, where do I start? Like I was saying earlier, just right off the bat, we get Lois and Clark having their interview, and I thought it was really interesting that Clark kind of has like this kind of like high squeaky voice at first, where he's kind of like, yeah, sure. And then as soon as like Lois hits the record button, she says like Superman, and then he kind of leans forward, he's like Miss Lane. So he definitely kind of like drops into his Superman tone, kind of differentiate the two characters, Clark Kent, Superman. And then you kind of roll into the interview where, she's talking about how, Superman, saved the day, but he didn't consult with like the president or the Pentagon or anything like that. And then we kind of get clips of other different characters like Rick Flag Sr. and, Lex Luthor, the little smug look on his face and everything. And, as the interview's going on, things kind of build and build and build and build till eventually Superman's like, people were going to die. It just shows like the lid's been pulled off of him, and, how he can get so easily frustrated, all these questions that Lois is bringing to him. Then we kind of get into like the montage of everything of like, the scene where Superman's like beaten down, he like falls down into like the street, and, the crowd's going around him, they're like, Superman, and, they're trying to help him up. And then the really fun line of when Superman is fighting the kaiju, and he's like, hey buddy, eyes up here, and flies off, and then we kind of get into more of like the action beats and everything like that, which looks really, really fun. Kind of like a mixture of shots that we've seen before in the other trailers, but also, more added stuff, more stuff with like Clark's parents, with his Ma and Pa Kent. It's cool to see Ma Kent in there. That funny scene of like, I got your boots clean, I'll get them ready for you. And then, Clark giving her the nod and then kind of going off. And then, Pa Kent encouraging him, saying like, oh, your choice is to find who you are. It was really cool seeing that. It was like really emotional, and him kind of like putting his arm around his shoulder and everything. I thought that was really cool. And, Lex Luthor kind of going crazy, describing Superman as like, he's not a man, he's an it. And, showing Superman like in the prison, getting beaten down by, Lex's goons and everything. And then, also seeing like him and the engineer kind of breaking into the Fortress of Solitude. And then Crypto kind of like, barking and like punching the engineer and everything. Getting more of the villains like Ultraman and other enemies that he's going to be facing throughout the movie. And then, Lex saying like, it's become the focal point of the world's conversation. I will not let that happen. And then him, the camera going like, yeah. So I thought that was really cool. And then we kind of get like more action beats with like, Hot Girl and, Guy Gardner, Mr. Terrific as the Justice League and everything. So I think they look really exciting for sure. And yeah, just more stuff with like Superman saving people and everything, which is really cool. And seeing more shots of Metamorpho in there, kind of putting his hands together and kind of creating a new element. And the whole trailer kind of ends with Superman flying up into the sun. Everyone's kind of like pointing up and cheering and like, recording with their cell phones. And then suddenly Superman kind of falls to the ground. And we get the Superman logo and the tag at the end of Lois going like, you have a dog? And then cutting to Superman kind of laying on the bed with Crypto on his chest. And he's kind of like, oh, I thought that was really funny. But yeah, it just looks like a really fun trailer. Definitely getting chills listening to the music and all different like action shots and character moments, stuff like that. So yeah, it's definitely getting me more excited for this movie. And July 11th can't come soon enough. Also in May of this year, Nathan Fillion said that he drew inspiration for Guy Gardner speaking his mind with no filter from Estelle Getty's Sophia Petrillo from the sitcom Golden Girls, which I think is pretty funny. I've seen a couple episodes of Golden Girls and I can totally see the comparison. So it's gonna be really fun to see how he takes those aspects from that character and then puts it into the character of Guy Gardner. He also referred back to the character's origin story, in which Guy Gardner was hit by the bus and put into a coma, as what flipped the switch of his personality, making him a little bit off. So that's also going to be interesting to see. Not only is he going to be kind of like an abrasive jerk who always speaks his mind, but he's also just going to be a little bit off. I'm sure that'll kind of contribute to the chaos that this character will bring, whether it be unintentional or not. So that's going to be really interesting to see. And as we've seen from the trailers, the film retains the character's iconic bowl haircut from the comic books. And jumping ahead a little bit, there's actually a couple of behind the scenes videos of Nathan Fillion trying on a bunch of different wigs and eventually landing on the whole iconic bowl haircut. So I thought that was really funny and entertaining, which is something that Nathan Fillion insists on having, despite discussions about changing up the hairstyle. So I'm glad that he kept the haircut, which kind of contributes to the whole ridiculousness of the character and the sort of light tone they're trying to set with the film. And I forgot to report this in the last video, but back in July of 2023, the character of Hot Girl was described as a superhero with wings and various melee weapons who was reincarnated from an alien, retaining her memories and her past trauma with a grimy demeanor. And we obviously got those visuals from the trailer, but as far as being a reincarnated alien and retaining the memories of her past trauma, it's something that we haven't really gotten from the trailers. So that's going to be really interesting to see. And it's going to be interesting to see how she kind of plays off of Guy Gardner, who's this kind of like crazy, a little bit off kind of character, and how she's kind of like this serious, sort of traumatized character and how they kind of play off each other. I'm sure the character Mr. Terrific is going to kind of be the one who kind of balances the two, where you kind of got the id and the super ego, and then he's going to be like the ego that kind of balances the two out. So that's definitely going to be an interesting dynamic for this new Justice League. And I'm really interested to see how it all plays out. And then also back in May of this year, Isabel Merced said that the self-awareness and the comedic aspects of the film really helped the character make light of her trauma. So that's really good to hear, especially what I said earlier about her being paired with Guy Gardner, who's definitely more of the off character. I'm sure a lot of his comedic aspects and all of his sort of self-deprecating humor kind of helps her feel at ease about her past trauma and kind of help her be more comfortable with who she is. So that's going to be good to see. And then also in June of this year, Michael Rosenbaum was cast in an undisclosed voice role, and I have no idea who he could be, but I know there's rumors that he might be the voice of Jor-El, because there's that one scene in that extended trailer when Superman is being carried into the Fortress of Solitude by the androids, and you can kind of hear voices in the background. So maybe that'll be his role, or maybe he'll be somebody completely different. But I'm pretty sure this is probably going to be like a secret role, and we won't really find out until the movie comes out. So I guess we'll have to wait until then. But it's really cool to know that Michael Rosenbaum's in this movie, especially the fact that he played Lex Luthor in the Smallville series, and especially since he did that podcast interview with James Gunn years ago talking about his role in DC. So I'm sure they formed a friendship there. But yeah, either way, I'm really excited that he's in this movie, and we'll see what his voice role is revealed to be once the movie comes out. And then also in June of this year, we got a bunch of behind the scenes videos from the movie. One with David Cornsweet dressed in the Superman costume and being in character while he's greeting a bunch of kids. One of James Gunn talking about the Daily Planet, and another one talking about the making of the android characters, which all look really good. And kind of like what I was saying before, like it really just shows like the love and the care that's being put in this production. And I'm pretty sure all that's going to reflect on screen. So it definitely gets me more excited about the movie. And I can't wait to see all the hard work that this crew's been putting in this movie once we finally see it in theaters. And then finally we got several character posters, and they all look really good. They definitely kind of fit with the new poster that was released with Superman crossing crossing his arms and looking up, and looks all bright and colorful and positive. And I like how all the different minor characters even get posters, like Crypto and Number 4, and all the different hero characters, and even a couple of villains character posters, including Teschmacher who's doing a selfie, and even some of the characters from the Daily Planet. But yeah, it definitely creates more hype for the movie and helps us get to know the characters a little bit more, and really sets the tone for what this movie's all about. You know, like I was saying earlier about being bright and colorful and positive, and not taking itself too seriously, and kind of really leaning into the fantastical aspects of the movie. So yeah, it definitely gets me excited, and hopefully I can grab one of these posters before the movie comes out. And literally, as I was finishing up editing on this video, we got a bunch of new material for Superman. Earlier this month, we got a 30-second teaser trailer called Rivalry, which showcases Lex Luthor's hatred for Superman. And we got a couple new shots here and there, but it's mostly just kind of recycled footage from previous trailers. But it still gets me super excited for the movie, and really gives me more context of why Lex Luthor hates Superman so much, and the things he's willing to do in order to bring Superman down. And then on to the big news, we got a brand new trailer announcing that tickets have gone on sale, and it looks epic and amazing. Kind of with the Rivalry teaser trailer, it definitely showcases the hatred that Lex Luthor has over Superman, especially the fact that Superman's all powerful and he's saving everyone. Like that opening scene when that tower's about to fall down, and that woman's trapped in the car, and she thinks that the building's about to fall on top of her, but then she looks to the side, but then sees that Superman's using all fours to hold up the building. And then continues with Lex Luthor, Ultraman, Teschmacher, and the engineer breaking into the Fortress of Solitude. And I have no idea how they're going to get into the Fortress of Solitude, but it's going to be really interesting once the movie actually comes out. And like in the previous trailers, we see the androids trying to stop them, and then the engineer turning her hands into blades and then slicing them up as Lex Luthor walks up to one of the consoles. And we kind of get that monologue of how Superman's all powerful and how he's become the focal point of the entire world's conversation, like we heard in the last trailer, and how Lex Luthor will stop at nothing to prevent that from happening, and how he's going to go after everyone Superman loves, including Lois Lane and his parents. So it just makes that even more personal for Superman. And again, I have no idea how Lex Luthor is going to find out, but with Lex being Lex, I'm sure he's going to find a way to do it. We also get more of the personal tension between Superman and Lex Luthor, which is something we haven't really gotten too much in the previous trailers. But it's really cool hearing the voiceover of these two characters interacting, and how Superman continues to be resistant to all of Lex Luthor's schemes. But I think what I really like most about this trailer is that it definitely gets more into the action of the movie and all the trials that Superman's going to be facing in it. We get more extended sequences of the enemies he's going to be facing, like the Kaiju and the Hammer of Baravia and Ultraman. And it looks like Crypto's going to be helping out during some of the battles, so that should be really fun. We also get a lot of fantastical scenes, including one shot behind Superman's head. He's kind of like floating in space, and there's some kind of tentacle monster wrapped around his neck. We also get a shot of Lois Lane flying some kind of spaceship, which I think belongs to Mr. Terrific, so that should be interesting. As well as a shot of Superman using some kind of pole to hit back an enemy. And I'm guessing that's going to be inside Lex Luthor's prison after Superman and Metamorpho work together to break out. We also get more interactions with the Justice Gang, including one shot of Mr. Terrific kind of using his technology to float in the air and shooting a bunch of those laser balls towards the camera. And then there's another interaction with Superman and Guy Gardner, where Guy Gardner is saying like, make a move, Big Blue. So it's definitely going to be interesting seeing Superman's interaction with the Justice Gang, whether they be allies or whether they be rivals. And then I like that shot towards the end where Mr. Terrific's yelling at Superman saying like, hey, stop messing around. And then Superman turns to him and is like, I'm not messing around, I'm doing important stuff. And then kind of rolls behind that ledge. And then we kind of get more action shots of Superman saving people. And that shot of the little boy from the previous trailer playing the flag and looking up and going like, Superman, Superman, along with the rest of the crowd. And Lex Luthor getting even more jealous and saying like, they chose him, let them die. And of course the big shot of Superman flying to the air and using his laser vision and spinning around and shooting all those different enemies. And then we end the trailer with Superman flying and the camera's following him, and then it says, get tickets now. So it definitely gets me more excited for the movie. But yeah, overall this is a really great trailer, and I can't wait to see it on July 11th. All right, now we move on to Peacemaker Season 2. And yeah, I'm actually really excited for Peacemaker Season 2. Before making this video, I pretty much binge watched all of Season 1, and I really enjoyed it. You know, it's very like dark and violent and, you know, very adult, but I think overall it was like really entertaining. You know, I love the characters. I love the character of Peacemaker, Christopher Smith, played by John Cena. I thought he was really cool, and I thought he had a really cool arc in this story. You know, he was kind of like, you know, like the joke character in The Suicide Squad. He was like, I'm going to make peace by any means possible, no matter how many men, women, and children I have to kill in order to get it. So, you know, it's kind of like this joke anti-version of Captain America kind of in a way, and they kind of embraced that. So I think that was really fun. But yeah, they kind of really like humanized his character. You know, they gave him a lot of backstory. You know, they showed his life before he joined Task Force X and his father and, you know, his brother and everything, and how his father was just this horrible neo-Nazi guy who kind of pitted these two boys together, and, you know, how like they would just have these kind of like fights and everything like that, you know, and people would bet money, and then how Peacemaker accidentally killed his brother in the fight, and how he felt all that guilt and shame, and especially, you know, all that stuff that his father brought onto him, and that kind of made him who he is, and that, you know, he's always had this mission to bring peace to whatever situation he's in. And then obviously that got twisted by, you know, his father's manipulation, and how, you know, that caused him to, you know, become just a mass murderer in a way, you know, in order to embrace peace. And then obviously, you know, he got recruited by Waller and then brought into Project Starfish, and then we got everything that happened in The Suicide Squad, and, you know, that kind of sent him kind of reeling like, who am I? What do I do? What's my identity? And this show kind of like helps him embrace who he is, kind of like gives him a new mission in life, is, you know, to protect others, you know, obviously protect the world from this alien threat that happened happens with Project Butterfly and all these different like butterfly alien creatures, taking over these people's bodies and everything in order to have this different mission and everything like that, in order to change society and have it kind of conform to their ways, because they see that human beings are just super flawed, which totally we are, and they think that their ways are best for us to control us and have us be a better society. And how Peacemaker kind of sees past that and kind of brings an end to it. Spoilers for everything for Peacemaker season 1 if you haven't seen it. Again, watch it on Max. Come back and watch this by destroying the giant cow monster and destroying their sap supply. But yeah, I like how it kind of ended kind of ambiguously, like, oh, Peacemaker, did he make the right decision in killing the cow and bringing an end to Project Butterfly? But I think it's a really good ending to that story arc, and then kind of sets us up for what could possibly happen in season 2. Now he's part of this new team with Adebayo and Economos and Harcourt, and obviously with Waller and Vigilante, which I thought was a really fun character too. It kind of reminded me of Deadpool, how he's kind of like this snarky character, and he's always like super sarcastic, but he doesn't really know social cues at all. But yeah, I really liked all the characters, really liked the storyline, and it really kind of set us up for what could happen in this new DCU. And back in February 2022, the second season was announced, and James Gunn was announced to write and direct all the episodes. And then in February 2023, he said that work would continue after Waller was made, since Superman was going to be his next project. And then in that October, James Gunn said that the new season of Peacemaker would take place within the new DCU continuity. But then in March of 2024, James Gunn said that Waller had been delayed because of the 2023 writers and actors strikes, and that this season of Peacemaker would actually be produced first. And then filming finally began later in 2024 after all the strikes had ended. But that was also the time that he was directing Superman, so he wasn't able to direct all the episodes, so he had to kind of give some of the episodes away to other directors so that he can focus more on Superman, which totally makes sense, since Superman is kind of like the big project that kind of sets up the entire DCU, so you kind of have to put more focus on that in order to make it good before working on any other projects. And they also had a pre-shoot in April of 2024 ahead of principal photography, which started in June of 2024 and then concluded in November of 2024. And it was announced that this new season is actually set to premiere in August of this year, so we don't really have to wait too much longer. Pretty much after Superman comes out, we just have to wait a month, and then this new season will come out, so that'd be really cool. And that in the continuity is supposed to take place after Creature Commandos and Superman, which totally makes sense for the release order, so we don't really have to worry about things kind of being out of timeline order. We can just have the TV shows and movies come out, and we can just follow the continuity that way. Also, Frank Grillo is confirmed to return for this season of Peacemaker, which will be interesting to see how he interacts with Peacemaker, especially since Peacemaker is responsible for the death of his son. So it'll be interesting to see how those two characters interact, and hopefully by this point Peacemaker would be kind of more apologetic for his previous actions, and hopefully he'll be more humble towards Rick Flag Sr. and try to ask for his forgiveness, and hopefully the two will finally form a bond. I'm sure like there'll be conflict earlier in the season, and then as the show goes on they'll learn to trust each other and then face whatever threat they're going to be facing in the new season. But overall, yeah, I'm really excited for Peacemaker season 2. Like, I was definitely not expecting to enjoy Peacemaker season 1 as much as I did, and it'd be interesting to see how season 2 kind of factors into this new DCU continuity, because it didn't really have too much to do with the DCEU. I know there was kind of like references here and there to like characters and events, but James Gunn was saying that there's supposed to be kind of like a rough memory of what happened in the DCEU, but it's really just going to be like its own new story, which yeah, totally makes sense, because again, there wasn't really too many things from the larger DCEU that could kind of impede on this new version of the DCU. So yeah, I'm sure James Gunn will have his own separate story, and we'll see how it kind of connects to the overall DCU, and how it kind of sets up events for future threats that the heroes will be facing later on. So yeah, overall, I'm really excited for season 2, and yeah, can't wait to see what happens with it. And we actually have a bunch of updates for Peacemaker season 2. I forgot to report this in the last video, but back in June of 2024, Sol Rodriguez was cast as the character of Sasha Bordeaux. Tim Meadows was casted as Langston Fleury, an Argus agent, and Newt Lee was confirmed to be reprising his role as Judo Master from the first season, while David Denman was casted in an undisclosed role. And also back in November of 2024, Anissa Matlock, Taylor St. Clair, Dorian Kingi, and Brandon Stanley were cast in undisclosed roles. So it's going to be interesting to see what roles these characters play within season 2, especially the ones whose characters have been confirmed for the season. I'm not really too familiar with Sasha Bordeaux, but just by doing research, I know she's a character affiliated with Batman, so maybe she'll serve as some kind of setup for the DCU's version of Batman, but we'll see how that goes. As far as Langston Fleury, I don't really know too much about him, but just seeing how Tim Meadows portrays him in the trailer, looks like he's definitely going to be kind of like that no-nonsense new director of Argus, and how he doesn't really care about his crew. He's just kind of like insulting them and giving them kind of like derogatory nicknames and everything, but he definitely looks like he's going to like get the job done and kind of be more of like a comedic character, but also take himself way too seriously, so it's going to be interesting seeing that. And seeing Judo Master there again is going to be really fun. I really liked his character in the first season, and it's definitely going to be interesting what his arc's going to be in this season. Is he still going to be an enemy? Is he eventually going to join the Peacemaker team, or is he just gonna like fight for himself? So we'll see what happens when season 2 comes out. And then back in February of this year, James Gunn said that he enjoyed evolving the character of Rick Flag Sr. in the DC universe from his introduction as a protagonist in the animated series Creature Commandos. So I think that's gonna be really interesting. And I also know that Rick Flag Sr. is gonna appear as Superman, so it's gonna be interesting seeing how he's portrayed in that movie, and then how he continues to evolve in the Peacemaker series, especially the fact that he's now going to be confronting the character of Peacemaker after Peacemaker killed his son Rick Flag Jr. in the Suicide Squad movie. So it's definitely going to be interesting what kind of dynamic that brings. He also said that this season was more about Christopher Smith, referring to Peacemaker's real name, and the interconnectivity between the characters and their personal lives, which we definitely see more of in the trailer, especially with the fact that Peacemaker wanted to join the Justice League and kind of going to that warehouse for an interview and interviewing with Maxwell Lord and Hawkgirl and Guy Gardner, and how they switch off the microphone and they're kind of like insulting Peacemaker, and Peacemaker is like, wait, I can hear you guys. Is this supposed to be how the interview goes? And, them kind of rejecting him and everything. So yeah, it's definitely going to be interesting to see how Peacemaker, Adebayo and Economos and Harcourt and Vigilante kind of like deal with their personal lives. You kind of see each one of them dealing with some kind of issue, like Adebayo dealing with like her wife and everything, and like how this job is kind of coming between them, and how no one kind of takes the rest of the team seriously. Harcourt is going through that therapy session where she suffers from toxic masculinity, and she's like, what? And then the scene where like Economos is visiting Adebayo, at the motel, and then he's like, we're the worst level of Grand Theft Auto there is. So I think that was interesting. And then of course Vigilante feeling like, why doesn't anybody respect us? Nobody likes us, nobody cares about us. So it's going to be interesting seeing where the characters are at the beginning of this season, and how they kind of gradually evolve into the larger DCU, and what kind of trials and tribulations they're going to have to go through in order to earn respect of like the Justice League, and eventually become members of this whole DC universe and everything. So I'm definitely excited to see kind of like what they go through, and how kind of like the group Argus is kind of like going after them and everything. So yeah, definitely be interesting for sure. And then back in May of this year, we got a brand new trailer revealing John Cena also portraying another version of Peacemaker, who appears from an alternate universe within the DC multiverse. So that'd be interesting. I've heard rumors that the other version of Peacemaker is actually from the DCEU, and now he's confronting the Peacemaker from the DCU. So it'll be interesting to see what that dynamic is, especially with the Marvel Cinematic Universe doing the whole multiverse saga. It'll be interesting to see how the DCU does it. And I'm sure there's going to be a lot of like meta references and meta humor and stuff like that, especially the fact that Peacemaker season 1 started off in the DCEU, and Peacemaker was interacting with a lot of like DCEU characters like Batman and Wonder Woman and Superman and all the rest of the Justice League, and to see like, okay, now he's suddenly in the DCEU, and how are they going to address all that? So I'm pretty sure with the two versions of Peacemaker, colliding, I'm sure that's James Gunn's way of like addressing the fact that yes, there's a multiverse, there's different versions of these DC characters, and this season's going to explore that idea. I know this is just a teaser trailer, and I'm sure probably in the next show that we get closer to the release in August, we'll finally get more answers to these questions that we've been having, based on the little tag at the very end of the trailers. So we'll see what happens with that. And I definitely know there's a DC multiverse out there, especially with, Crisis on Infinite Earths, that whole comic book storyline, and the whole like, Arrowverse version of it on TV. So it'll be interesting to see like how this version of the DCU explores the multiverse and all the conflicts that get brought up, as this kind of DC universe unfolds. And also, like I was saying earlier, the trailer revealed Hawkgirl, Guy Gardner, and Maxwell Lord, played by Isabella Merced, Nathan Fillion, and Sean Gunn, James Gunn's brother, who are also making their debuts in Superman. So it was really cool seeing them, seeing them at first in the Superman trailer, and then, seeing them pop up in Peacemaker, just to show that kind of interconnectivity of the movies and the TV shows, and how James Gunn said that, no matter what medium you're in, if you're in animation, if you're in live action television, or if you're in the movie, you're going to appear as this character. So it's kind of cool seeing that continuity, and the fact that everything's linear, the events of Superman take place first, and then we're going to go into Peacemaker. So it's going to be interesting to see where those characters are at after the events of Superman, and how they're trying to expand more of the Justice League, and because obviously there's more superheroes out there, and kind of seeing their kind of attitude toward the superheroes, and seeing like who actually fits within their team, and who they're just like, okay, we can write them off. So I'm definitely excited to see those characters in this series, and it's definitely a credit to James Gunn for having that kind of continuity in mind when it comes to characters appearing in different mediums within the DCU. And then also in May of this year, it was revealed that the series would be dropping on August 21st. So we only have to wait a little over a month after Superman releases to get the continuation of the DCU. So that's going to be really exciting. And then finally in May of this year, it was revealed that Michael Rooker will be playing the character of Red Saint Wild, who's the world's foremost eagle hunter, who's on a mission to kill Eagly. So that's going to be really interesting to see. I know Michael Rooker has been in several James Gunn movies and TV shows, so it totally makes sense that he's going to be in the show. Whatever capacity he might be, I'm pretty sure it's going to be like a small role that's just kind of recurring throughout the season. This kind of like C storyline of Red Saint Wild going after Eagly, and I'm sure it's going to end with him about to kill Eagly, but then Peacemaker kills him instead and saves Eagly. So it's probably just going to be like a fun comedic role, maybe like kind of like a Coyote versus, Roadrunner kind of situation or something, where like Red Saint Wild's like always after Eagly, but Eagly's always escaping. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with that. I'm still looking forward to seeing him in the series, and what kind kind of like comedy he brings to the show. All right, now we move on to Lanterns. And the official premise of the show is that it's supposed to be about Hal Jordan and Jon Stewart teaming up to investigate a mystery on Earth. So I think that'd be really cool. I know that Peter Safran was saying that this is supposed to be an Earth-based story, kind of inspired by True Detective. And that's supposed to be a huge HBO quality event, which makes sense for multiple reasons, since one, it's a show on Max, and then two, True Detective season 1 was an amazing story starring Matthew McConaughey and Woody Harrelson, and it's definitely like a very dark, dramatic show and like a lot of twists and turns and, you know, very, very intense. So to see that in a DCU project with Hal Jordan and Jon Stewart, I think would be really, really cool for sure. And in December of 2022, James Gunn confirmed that the Green Lantern characters will be important to the DCU, which totally makes sense because we didn't really get a ton of them in the DCEU. You know, way before the Snyderverse, we got the Green Lantern movies starring Ryan Reynolds, and we already know how that turned out. So the Snyderverse was kind of afraid to bring the Green Lantern into the DCEU. I know we got a little bit of glimpses of Green Lantern characters in the Justice League Snyder Cut, but we didn't really get them fully embraced. So to have James Gunn and Peter Safran take the Green Lantern characters seriously, and especially kind of launching them into the DCU in a True Detective style story, I think this is the best call for it for sure. So I'm sure we're not going to get a ton of like cheesiness from the 2011 Green Lantern movies, but we're going to have something that's like really dark and serious and, you know, helps us embrace these characters even more. And back in 2023, when James Gunn announced the entire slate of the new DCU, he revealed that Lanterns would be one of the series, and that how it was definitely something that was long in development. So I'm sure they've had this idea for a long time of how to take these characters seriously and how to bring them into this whole new DCU continuity. And at the end of May of 2024, Chris Mundy, Tom King, and Dave Lindelof actually wrote the pilot script and series Bible for Lanterns. And I think they're really good filmmakers. You know, I know Dave Lindelof has been kind of hit or miss with Lost, but you know, he's done a lot of other series, you know, like Leftovers and things like that, which have actually been really, really good. So I think the three of them will do a really good job at kind of taking Peter Safran and James Gunn's vision for the Green Lantern characters and making something really great. And Chris Mundy actually serves as a showrunner for the 8-episode series for Lanterns. And in October of 2024, Kyle Chandler was casted as Hal Jordan, and Aaron Pierre was casted as Jon Stewart. And I think that's actually perfect casting, just because they look so similar to those characters, especially Aaron Pierre. Like, I'm not too familiar with his work, but just seeing like the different screenshots of him, he like definitely looks exactly like Jon Stewart, especially the Jon Stewart from like Justice League Unlimited. You know, he's already got like the green eyes, and you know, he's got like the jawline, you know, the hair and everything like that. So I think both of them could be really, really cool. I think Kyle Chandler is a fantastic actor, everything he's been in, you know, Friday Night Lights and so on and so forth. So I think it'd be a really cool choice to play Hal Jordan. And then Aaron Pierre, I'm sure, is going to be amazing in it as well, you know, especially with Chris Mundy directing them and everything for this series. So yeah, I think it'd be a really cool series, and actually just gets me more and more excited for it for sure. Also, a director named James Hawes was actually confirmed to be directing the first 2 episodes of the series, as well as executive produce. And filming is actually supposed to take place from mid-February to July of 2025 in Los Angeles. And in November of 2024, James Gunn actually said that he was intending that this series be released sometime around the time that Supergirl gets released, which is scheduled for June of 2026. So that'd be cool. In 2026, we'll get Lanterns, and then like a month or two later, we get a major motion picture with Supergirl. Also, Peter Safran said that the mystery that Hal Jordan and Jon Stewart are investigating kind of lead into the main storyline in the DCU. So not quite sure what that'll be. Maybe it'll lead to like a Darkseid storyline, since the DCU is kind of like an equivalent to the MCU, and the big bad in the MCU is Thanos, and then Darkseid is kind of like the equivalent to Thanos. So maybe it'll lead to something with that. I'm not really quite sure what the timeline is going to be with this whole Gods and Monsters chapter 1 and how many other chapters there'll be. So maybe it'll be like a smaller thread or something. Maybe it'll be Sinestro, Brainiac, or Doomsday or something like that. But we'll see. You know, it just gets me more excited for what the ending of this season is going to be. So yeah, we'll have all this time to talk about like different theories and speculation and things like that. And hopefully with the trailer, we'll get hints of what the overall mystery that these two characters are going to be investigating. And then we can kind of get our theories of like what James Gunn and Peter Safran's plans are for this overall DCU and chapter 1 Gods and Monsters. So we'll see how it goes. But yeah, overall, I'm really excited about this show, and yeah, I can't wait to see what happens with it. And we actually got a bunch of updates for Lanterns, including a bunch of casting updates that I forgot to mention in the last video. Back in October of last year, Kelly McDonald was cast in the role of Kelly, who's described as a sheriff who's deeply devoted to her family and her close-knit town. Back in November of 2024, Garrett Dillahunt was cast in the role of William Macon, who's described as a modern cowboy who hides a self-righteous, conspiracy-minded personality behind a charming facade. Also in November of last year, Purnat Jagannathan was cast in the role of Zoe, who's described as a woman who's just as composed and cunning as the influential men around her. And then back in January of this year, Ulrich Thompson was cast in the role of Sinestro, who's described as a rogue former member of the Green Lantern Corps, who's ruthless yet undeniably charming, and once was a mentor of Hal Jordan. And I'm guessing that William and Zoe are going to be original characters for this Green Lantern series, but just based on the descriptions, they sound like they're going to be very antagonistic to Hal and John, and it'll definitely be interesting to see like how those characters kind of like fit within the storyline that these two main characters are going to be going through. And of course, the character of Sinestro is definitely an iconic iconic character from the Green Lantern series. I know we got him in the Green Lantern movie with Ryan Reynolds, and he was just kind of and he was definitely kind of like that mentor figure for Hal Jordan before we got that very hint at the end that he's going to become a villain for a sequel that we never got. So it'd be really cool to see like how they portray him in this series. And it looks like he'll be like a full-on antagonist for the series, and it'll be interesting how he's going to integrate into like the main storyline that Hal and John are going through. And back in February of this year, Peter Safran said that this series could go beyond the first season. I know he and James Gunn were saying that this is going to be a self-contained story with 8 episodes, but I'm sure there's going to be like a hint at there being more. But I'm glad they're just focusing on one season and trying to make it as good as possible, and just having a hint of the possibility of there being a season 2, especially when you're dealing with like the Green Lantern Corps. There's just so many stories you can tell. But I'm glad they're going to like focus just on like this one 8-episode season, very character driven between like the relationship like Hal Jordan and Jon Stewart. But yeah, hopefully if it does well, then it'll warrant a season 2, and maybe we'll get it sooner rather than later. But first we'll see how this first season goes before we can kind of speculate about what a season 2 could look like. And James Gunn said that he was excited for the series to have a different tone from his first DCU film Superman, despite that project also featuring Green Lantern and Guy Gardner. And kind of jumping ahead a little bit, that was also a piece of news that was revealed that Nathan Fillion's Guy Gardner will be appearing in the series, and I'm pretty sure it's probably going to be a small role. I don't think he's going to be like a main character, but I think it's a good way to show that continuity between Superman and Peacemaker, the 2 other titles that he's going to be appearing in, just having that through line. And Nathan Fillion also described Guy Gardner as being an abrasive member of the Green Lantern Corps, which totally makes sense, especially the fact that Nathan Fillion was describing Guy Gardner as being kind of like an overconfident jerk in Superman. So I'm guessing he hasn't really learned his lesson from that movie, and just seeing how he is in the trailer for Peacemaker season 2, it seems like he still has that kind of like overconfident, jerky personality. So hopefully with the Lantern series, maybe, once he kind of butts heads with Hal Jordan and Jon Stewart, hopefully he'll learn to stop being so overconfident and abrasive and start to be more of like a team player, not only with the Green Lantern Corps, but also with the Justice League and everything. So we'll see what happens with the series. Also in February of this year, Variety magazine did an article which revealed a bunch of information about the series, including an official premise, which says that the Green Lanterns are intergalactic heroes who wear rings that give them extraordinary powers. And the series follows experience Hal Jordan and his recruit Jon Stewart as they investigate a murder in Nebraska, which leads them into darker mysteries and reckonings. So it definitely feels like they're following the whole True Detective model that Peter Safran said that they drew influence from. And also jumping ahead a little bit, Peter Safran also described the show as being similar to the spy thriller series Slow Horses, which I haven't seen, but based on the fact that it's going to be similar to a spy thriller series, definitely gets me more excited, and just makes me wonder what Hal Jordan and Jon Stewart are going to be going through as this sort of mystery story unfolds. It also said that Stephen Williams, Geeta Vasant Patel, and Alik Sakharov will be directing episodes of the series. And also Chris Mundy said that James Hawes' direction of the first 2 episodes really captured the scope that they're going for. And the fact that James Hawes was actually the creator of Slow Horses, which was an inspiration for Lanterns, definitely gets me more excited. So I'll definitely see how it goes for sure. And then we also got some more character descriptions. Hal Jordan was described as a former test pilot and a legendary member of the Green Lantern Corps who is approaching retirement, from Sam Shepard's portrayal of Chuck Yeager from The Right Stuff, which I haven't seen, but I know it has to do with like astronauts, and especially since Hal Jordan was a former test pilot, he definitely has that kind of personality. And the fact that he's close to retirement, kind of reminds me of like those classic like buddy cop movies. You got the experienced captain who's paired with the rookie, and the police captain has like one last mission before he goes off to retirement, and then once he's paired with this rookie, they kind of butt heads at first as they're trying to solve this kind of big mystery that's going on. So I'm pretty sure that's going to be the tone with Lanterns, so it definitely gets me more excited for sure. And Chris Mundy said that Kyle Chandler had those same qualities, as well as the dry wit that they thought was important for Hal Jordan. It also described Jon Stewart as a new Green Lantern recruit who Hal Jordan is trained to replace himself. So I think that'll definitely be an interesting dynamic for sure, especially with Hal Jordan getting close to retirement. I'm sure he wants to teach Jon Stewart everything he knows, especially the fact that Jon Stewart's going to eventually replace him. That just adds all this added pressure on Jon Stewart, and I'm sure like there's going to be a lot of conflict with their relationship, and that's just going to boil over, I'm sure, once they're trying to solve this mystery. And the whole kind of like father-son relationship is definitely going to be forged, and definitely gets me excited for what those dynamics could bring. And Chris Mundy said that the character is both a Marine and an artist, and felt that Aaron Pierre could portray both these aspects. He said that Pierre is a serious theater actor, yet he also looks like he's built in a lab to be an action star. So I think that could be really cool. It's kind of like how Ray Fisher started off as a theater actor and then became Cyborg in the Justice League movies. And I know things didn't really turn out well for him with the whole debacle with Joss Whedon and everything, but hoping with Aaron Pierre that he can bring those kind of like theater acting skills to the role of Jon Stewart and can bring something really interesting to the role. And Chris Mundy said that this series would stand alone from other DCU projects and was designed to tell a complete story, but he hoped that it could expand into many seasons. Kind of like what I was saying earlier about the fact that I'm glad they're just telling one good story with this first season, and then if it does well, they can make more seasons after that. So I'm glad that Chris Mundy's aware of this, so he doesn't have to feel that pressure about having all these different setups within this season for potentially future seasons, and just focusing on this one story, making it as good as possible. Also, the series doesn't adapt any specific storylines from the comic books, but Chris Mundy said the series is steeped in Green Lantern comic book lore, such as the main characters have Green Lantern rings and the associated powers, and other aspects of the lore are seen or referenced within the series. So I'm glad they're doing that. I'm not super familiar with the Green Lantern lore. I mean, I know some aspects of it, but I don't know all the deep cut stuff, so I'm glad they're making the series kind of cater more towards the people who don't know too much about the whole Green Lantern lore and just make something enjoyable for for, casual viewers and casual audiences and just tell a good story, and then, have those little deep cut references for the hardcore Green Lantern fans. So I'm glad they're having that balance with the series. And Chris Mundy said that he was really excited to create something really grounded within this kind of big, amazing mythology. He also said that he wanted this series to be accessible to audience who knew nothing about the comic book history, but be satisfying to those who do, which is like I was saying earlier about having that balance, which I definitely appreciate. And then back in February of this year, it was expected for the series to debut in early 2026. So I'm guessing sometime in the spring, maybe sometime around March, but hopefully after Superman and Peacemaker are released, we'll get more information about Lanterns and the eventual release date. And then in March of this year, we got more casting announcements. Nicole Ari Parker was casted as Bernadette, Jon Stewart's mother, and Jasmine Cephas Jones will be portraying a young Bernadette. Jason Ritter was casted as Billy Macon, Carrie's husband and William's son who does his father's bidding. Also in March of this year, Sherman Augustus was casted as John Sr., Jon Stewart's father, and J. Alphonse Nicholson will be portraying a young John Sr. And then back in April of this year, Paul Ben Victor was cast in the role of Anton, who's described as an extraterrestrial who's devoted to exposing the truth and exacting vengeance on those who wronged his people and delivers his own brand of justice. Also, Chris Coy is casted in the role of Waylon Sanders, who's described as a nervous truck driver or an intelligent survivor whose real name is unknown. Also in May of this year, Laura Linney was cast in an undisclosed role. I have no idea what character she'll be. I don't know if she'll be an original character or if she'll be a deep cut DC character. I'm pretty sure they're probably going to keep this role a surprise, and we won't really find out until the actual series is released. But since Laura Linney is such a prominent name in the entertainment industry, and she was in the Netflix series Ozark, which was one of the inspirations for Damon Lindelof as he was help writing the stories, I'm pretty sure she's going to have like some kind of significant role. But I guess we'll have to wait until the series comes out. But either way, I'm really excited to see her in the series in whatever capacity she might be in, and we'll see how it goes. And it seems like all these are original characters, but just based on the descriptions, it seems like they're all going to be really interesting characters. And it'll definitely be interesting to see how they bounce off the main characters and see what kind of conflicts they bring up between them. So I'm definitely excited to see the dynamics they bring to the series for sure. Alright, now we move on to Supergirl Woman of Tomorrow. And for this one, James Gunn pretty much described it as a big, epic sci-fi film and a beautiful star-spanning tale, which actually gets me more excited for. He also described the contrast of Kara Zor-El / Supergirl's character with Clark Kent / Superman, and how Clark Kent was raised by Ma and Pa Kent in this kind of loving home and kind of interacted with all these different humans and kind of growing up to embrace human beings. But then Kara grew up on this chunk of the planet Krypton after it blew up and also watched everyone die around her and kind of became more of a jaded character. So I think that could be really interesting. When she actually does come to Earth and visits Clark Kent, seeing that contrast between the two characters I think could be really, really fun. And this movie takes its title from the comic book series Supergirl Woman of Tomorrow by Tom King and Bilquis Evely. And in that comic, it focuses on Kara Zor-El's quest throughout space guided by Crypto. So I'm not quite sure how much James Gunn is actually going to take from that storyline, but hopefully that can be a good way of bringing Kara Zor-El into the new DCU. And maybe at the end of Superman and Crypto kind of go out to find other Kryptonian survivors, and maybe they actually find Kara Zor-El and then bring her back to Earth, and then she kind of sees the different contrast that she has of her growing up and not having any loving parents around her, and not really embracing the humans as well. And maybe that can be like a good setup for where this new Supergirl movie goes. But speaking of the story, in November of 2023, a writer named Anna Zagira was confirmed to be writing the screenplay, and in January of 2024, Millie Alcock was actually confirmed to be playing Supergirl, and it was reportedly revealed that she's going to be making her debut in Superman. So maybe in a post-credit scene, which I think totally makes sense because I feel like the Superman movie already has enough heroes as it is. So to have another hero introduced within the story, I think would make it a little bit too crowded. So yeah, I think there'll definitely be a post-credit scene of, kind of like I theorized earlier, of Superman and Crypto going out to space and then find Kara Zor-El and then bring her back to Earth. So I think that would totally make sense. And then set up her movie later down the line. And then in April of 2024, Greg Gillespie was actually in talks to direct Supergirl, and then he was actually confirmed to direct the next month. And actually, as of this recording, they started filming a few days ago and will be going through till the end of May. And they'll actually be filming at Warner Brothers Studios in Leavesden and in London, England, and in Iceland. So I think that could be pretty exciting. We also got confirmation that Jason Momoa will be playing Lobo in the movie, and he previously portrayed Aquaman in the DCEU continuity, which I know we heard rumors about that before, like way back in the day, back in like October of 2022. And then we actually got that post by Jason Momoa on his social media where he confirmed that he was playing Lobo, and then James Gunn confirmed it as well. So I think that totally makes sense, just because Jason Momoa has been such a big part of the DCEU. And James Gunn and Pierce Safran said that they might have actors that were previously portraying characters in the DCEU in the new DCU continuity. So it's cool that we're actually seeing that in fruition. And yeah, hopefully we'll see more actors from the DCEU in the DCU. And yeah, I think he's like a perfect casting because like he looks just so much like Lobo. I was doing research on it, and I definitely think that he can portray that kind of character, especially with the kind of like biker personality that Lobo has. I feel like Jason Momoa can pull that off perfectly. And it's supposed to be released on June 26th of 2026. So we don't have to wait too much longer for it. So I think that'd be really cool. After Superman comes out, we only have to wait less than a year to get Supergirl. So I'm glad that we don't have to wait super long. No pun intended. But yeah, overall, I'm really excited about Supergirl. I don't really know too much about about her, but after reading the storyline of Supergirl Woman of Tomorrow, I think it could be a really interesting premise for a movie. I'm not sure like what the timeline's going to be. Is it going to be kind of like with Creature Commandos, where it starts off in present day and then kind of goes back to different flashbacks, kind of explaining Kara Zor-El's backstory, or is it just going to be more linear, where it just starts off kind of explaining Kara Zor-El's origins and how Krypton was destroyed and how she was kind of raised by herself on the kind of chunk of rock of Krypton and kind of goes on all these different adventures and becomes more of a jaded character. But either way, like I'm really excited to see what James Gunn does with it and what the writers and directors have in mind for the movie. But yeah, overall I think it'd be really cool. And I know we had the Supergirl series back in the kind of like CW version of Supergirl, but I'm sure like this one's going to be more like hardened warrior character and kind of stays more true to the comic book storyline. And yeah, I think it'd be really exciting. So yeah, hopefully as time goes on, we'll get more set photos and teaser posters and maybe a teaser trailer so we can kind of get more excited about the project. But yeah, overall, I'm excited to see how Kara Zor-El gets brought into the DCU and what kind of conflict she has with Clark Kent and how she eventually learns to embrace her superheroism and becomes part of the DCU. And we actually got a couple updates for Supergirl, including a couple that I forgot to mention in the last video. Back in January of this year, David Krumholtz was casted as Zor-El, Supergirl's father, and Emily Beecham was casted as Alora Imze, Supergirl's mother, which I actually think is really exciting. I'm not sure how long those characters are going to last within the movie, just because I know that obviously Krypton gets destroyed, along with almost everyone on the planet, except for Superman and Supergirl. And I'm not really quite sure if there'll be flashbacks with Supergirl, kind of reminiscing about her parents, or if she'll have some kind of message, kind of like how Superman does in the original movie, where he puts one of the crystals in the Fortress of Solitude and sees like a video message of his father. So I don't know if we'll get something like that, but it's really cool that we're going to be seeing her parents, and I'm glad they cast these actors to portray them, and we'll see what kind of dynamics they bring to the story and how they kind of affect Supergirl's character as she kind of goes through the story. And then back in May of this year, production actually wrapped. So now they're definitely in post-production, and then they're kind of on track for the release date in June. So I'm really excited. I'm pretty sure sometime after Superman comes out, or maybe sometime after Peacemaker season 2 comes out, we'll get a trailer and a poster and some behind the scenes footage and pictures of the production, just because I'm really curious about what this version of Supergirl will bring and how she's going to affect the overall DCU. Just because I know that James Gunn had that interview where he said that Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, and Supergirl were going to be the pillars of the new DCU. So I'm definitely excited to see her debut in this movie and what she brings to the overall DC universe. All right, now we move on to Clayface. When they first announced this back in December of 2024, it wasn't part of the initial run that James Gunn announced way back in 2023. And I didn't really know too much about the character, so it was kind of like a Clayface movie. Like, what are they going to do with this? But then once I actually saw him in action in Creature Commandos, it kind of built up my excitement for it. And now I can't wait for the Clayface movie, so I think it'd be really cool. And actually, this whole thing started back in March of 2023 with director Mike Flanagan and his partner from Intrepid Pictures named Trevor Macy, where they met with James Gunn and Peter Safran to talk about a possible Clayface movie, but have him not be a villain, kind of like how he's mostly portrayed in the comics. And I'm thinking that it might be based on the Johnny Williams version of Clayface from Batman Gotham Knights, where he's more of like an anti-hero in a way, and he actually becomes somewhat of a hero and tries to help Batman save the day. Also, in December of 2024, DC Studios actually greenlit the film based on the script written by Mike Flanagan, and Matt Reeves actually confirmed that he'd be producing the project alongside Lynn Harris from Six and Idaho Productions. And I think what's really cool about James Gunn and Peter Safran's process is that they don't force release dates on these different projects. They kind of wait for the script to be as good as possible. So if they get a pitch from a director or a writer for the DCU and they like it, they'll greenlit the project and produce it. So I think that kind of takes the pressure off these different filmmakers and everything. Like James Gunn and Peter Safran really want to make sure that these scripts are locked down and as good as possible before going into production or having a release date, so that they don't have to worry about continuity and, like production delays and lower quality in these different films and series moving forward. It's actually something I think that's really cool that they're doing. And filming is actually expected to begin in early 2025. And the studio is actually in search for directors since Mike Flanagan is really busy with his other projects, including an Exorcist film and a Carrie series. And I think what's also cool is that Peter Safran actually compared the tone of this movie to The Fly, which totally makes sense, especially if it's going to be centering around the character of Johnny Williams. I'm sure it's going to start off with Johnny Williams or whatever character they decide to use, kind of experimenting with like shape-shifting abilities, and then something goes wrong, he becomes Clayface and kind of becomes a monster in a way, terrifies people, but then as the story goes on, maybe he becomes more heroic and, eventually saves the day at the end. So I think that's really cool, kind of like a twist on the whole Fly storyline. And then finally, the film is actually supposed to be confirming to come out on September 11th of 2026. So we don't really have to wait too long in between the releases of the different projects. We'll get Lanterns, we'll get Supergirl in June, and then in September, we'll get Clayface. So 2026 is going to be a big year for the DCU. And I'm excited that we don't have to wait super long in between releases, and hopefully it'll just continue the storylines that James Gunn and Peter Safran have been setting up from the beginning of the DCU. And we can just see that continuity and that storytelling unfold, and we'll see what their grand plan is for the DCU. And we got a couple updates for Clayface. Back in February February of this year, the official premise was released, and it's described as a body horror Hollywood story about a B-movie actor who uses substances to stay relevant, but then becomes entirely made out of clay. So I think that'll be interesting. It's definitely kind of different from the original premise of Clayface from the comic books, but I'm really excited to see this new take on the character, especially with the fact that it's going to be dealing with body horror and Hollywood and B-level actors, probably just to make it a simpler story for audiences to understand and not really have it be bogged down with all this comic book lore, but try to keep it as simple as possible and entertaining as it can be. So this premise actually really gets me excited for the movie. Then also back in February of this year, Alan Tudyk was confirmed to not be reprising his voice role of Clayface from Creature Commandos and the standalone animated series Harley Quinn, because that wasn't his primary DC role, which is Dr. Phosphorus from Creature Commandos, which I think totally makes sense, especially with Alan Tudyk's primary role being Dr. Phosphorus. I'm sure James Gunn wants to have that character sometime in a live action form, whether it be like a series or a movie, so they want to kind of save Alan Tudyk for that, and then have whoever's going to be portraying Clayface to be a brand new actor. So it'll be interesting as the production goes on once they officially cast Clayface, and we'll see how they do in portraying the role. Then also back in February of this year, James Watkins was confirmed to direct the film. And I'm not too familiar with his work. I haven't seen all of his movies, but I know he definitely does a lot of like horror and suspense and supernatural thrillers and things like that. So he's definitely the perfect choice to do a Clayface movie, which is, a body horror movie. So I think that could be really exciting. And, just based on the script by Mike Flanagan, who's done a lot of like supernatural horror movies, I think it's like a perfect pairing. And the fact that, this script was brought to James Gunn and Peter Safran, and it was so good that they decided to just greenlight the movie. I think it's just a testament to how good the script is and the work of James Watts to bring the story to life. So yeah, it definitely gets me excited for the movie for sure. And then back in April this year, it was revealed that filming would be scheduled to begin in October of this year in the United Kingdom. So that's good news. I'm sure it'll probably just be like a couple months of filming, and then they can go into post-production after that, and they'll be able to stick with their release date of September of 2026. And then finally in May of this year, it was revealed that Hossein Amini was rewriting the script. And I'm not too familiar with his work, but I was going through his filmography, and I recognize a couple pieces of work that he's done, but I'm pretty sure he's probably just going to do a polish on the original script and maybe just tweak some dialogue and some action and just make it as smooth as possible, probably just to make it more accessible for the audience. But anything they can do to make the script even better is always good in my book. I'm sure they'll have everything finalized before they start filming in October, so we'll see how it goes. Alright, now we move on to Waller. And the official premise for this show is that it's supposed to continue the story of Amanda Waller and Team Peacemaker. So I'm pretty sure it's going to follow Amanda Waller dealing with the fact that her daughter Adebayo kind of exposed her for everything that happened with Task Force X and with Project Butterfly. And hopefully she'll try to find some kind of humbleness with the other heroes and try not to control them for her own selfish means, but try to embrace them as heroes and how they're trying to make way for themselves in this kind of new DCU and possible threats that could be coming up in the future. So I think that would be really interesting to see for her. And in May of 2022, Peacemaker's spinoff series was revealed to be centering around Amanda Waller, with Crystal Henry serving as head writer and showrunner along with Peter Safran and James Gunn. And when James Gunn and Peter Safran revealed the new DC slate in 2023, the second project was Waller, which James Gunn said would be a continuation of the Peacemaker series, because the second season of Peacemaker was delayed due to him focusing on the rest of the DCU, and that Crystal Henry was confirmed to be a co-showrunner with Jeremy Carver, and that Viola Davis was confirmed to be reprising her role as Amanda Waller. And like I was saying earlier, this show is actually scheduled to be kind of like an appetizer for the rest of the DCU, but it was delayed due to the writers and actors strike in 2023, and other actors from the Peacemaker series are confirmed to be in this show, including Steve Agee as John Economos, which totally makes sense because he's kind of one of Waller's right-hand man. He was in The Suicide Squad, he was in Peacemaker, and he was in Creature Commandos, so it'd be cool to see his dynamic with Waller, and hopefully we'll see Harcourt and Adebayo and maybe see even Vigilante in there as well. But yeah, overall I'm really excited about this show. I think the character of Amanda Waller has been really cool, seeing her way back in the day in Suicide Squad back in 2016, and then seeing her character evolved in The Suicide Squad and Peacemaker and Creature Commandos, and it'd be cool to see her own kind of series and see how her character kind of evolves to being kind of like this very selfish character who's only in it for herself to kind of being more of this humble character who actually cares about other people, and see how she kind of helps kind of shape the new DCU. So yeah, I'm actually really excited to see it for sure. There's only been one update for Waller. Back in February of this year, James Gunn said that the series was subsequently reconceived to come after Peacemaker Season 2, and they had struggled to perfect the script, which I think is kind of unfortunate just because Waller is such a big character within the kind of Suicide Squad universe, with Suicide Squad, The Suicide Squad, and with Peacemaker Season 1. So I'm pretty sure James Gunn was excited to have her her own series, but then he came up against scripting issues and everything, so it's totally understandable that he has to delay this project in order to make it as good as possible. But hopefully they find a good writer and they're able to kind of fix all the issues with the script and make it as good as possible, and hopefully it'll be the next project after Clayface, and James can kind of continue with that character and bring her into the larger DCU, but we'll see how it goes. All right, now we move on to The Authority, and not gonna lie, I know nothing about The Authority. I did a little bit of research on the premise and the characters in The Authority series, and yeah, it looks really, really cool. And James Gunn described The Authority as people who think that the world is completely broken, and the only way of fixing it is by taking means into their own hands, whether that means killing people or destroying heads of state or changing the government in a way, or whatever they can do to make the world better. So it'll be interesting to see how they fit into the DCU. Like, I know that they're supposed to make their first appearance in Superman, so I'm not sure if they're going to be kind of like antagonists in a way, and then maybe like Superman comes in and tries to show them positivity. Maybe he works together with Hawkgirl and Mr. Terrific and Green Lantern in order to kind of show them the other side of humanity, how like there's actually goodness in the world, and maybe that kind of changes the Authority's mind, and then they kind of, embrace the positivity that those characters are trying to bring to the world and help us try to make the world a better place instead of destroying the negativity in it and try to reshape it in their own image in a way. And Pierce Safran also compared the moral complexity of the team to Jack Nicholson's character in A Few Good Men. So yeah, I think that totally makes sense, and maybe there'll be some kind of like trial scene in the Fortress of Solitude where Superman is trying to introduce the Authority, like I said earlier, to the goodness in the world and kind of change the Authority's mind in order to help them be people who actually protect the world instead of destroying the negativity in it. And I think what's also interesting is that the Authority was actually created by Warren Ellis and Brian Hitch for an independent comic book publisher called Wildstorm, and that Wildstorm was actually acquired by DC Comics and was put into the DC continuity in 2011, and how it's kind of similar to James Gunn and Pierce Safran wanting to put the Authority characters within the DCU continuity. I think it's really interesting the different characters that are actually part of the Authority. There's Jenny Sparks, who's a British woman who can generate and turn into electricity. There is Jack Hawksmoor, who can psychically bond with different cities and gain powers from them. There's Swift, who's a Tibetan woman who has wings and talons. There's Apollo, who's like a bioengineered Superman pastiche. There's Midnighter, who's kind of like a bioengineered Batman who possesses the ability to foresee his opponent's moves in combat. There's the Engineer, who had her blood replaced by 9 pints of nanotechnology and used it to create solid objects with it. And finally, there's the Doctor, who's a Dutch drug addict and shaman who possesses all the powers of the hundreds of shamans who came before him. So I definitely think there's a lot of interesting characters in that lineup, and definitely have some like quirky powers and like some powers that are like actually really powerful and dangerous. So it'd be interesting to see how James Gunn fits them within the DCU continuity. And James Gunn described this as a passion project for him, and that he's been working that line with the other DCU writers for a while, and that it would have several connections with Superman. And there's actually a storyline in the comic books that centers around Superman and the Authority, where Superman and a former character from the Authority named Manchester Black assemble a new incarnation of the Authority to liberate the planet of Warworld from a character named Mongol. So obviously there's like a relationship there, and I'm sure James Gunn and Peter Safran are going to have like some kind of twist to make it fit within their DCU continuity, but I'm sure there's definitely going to be a relationship there between Superman and the Authority, so it'll be interesting to see what happens with that. But yeah, overall, I'm actually pretty excited about the Authority. Again, I don't know anything about them except for what I've read up on them through research, but yeah, just based on the characters and the abilities and kind of like their personal goals, I think it would be interesting to see how they fit into the DCU and how they're first introduced in Superman and how they can continue the storyline that was set up in that movie in their own film and how they're kind of embraced within the larger DCU. So yeah, overall, I'm really excited to see what happens with it. And there's only been one update with the Authority. Back in February of this year, other projects had taken priority over the Authority when James Gunn said that the film was very big and that the script had struggled to come together, which again is kind of a bummer, but kind of like what I was saying with the whole Waller situation, I'm glad that James Gunn has taken the time to make sure the script is as good as possible, and hopefully all the scripting issues can be resolved and they can find a good writer, then we can get that film into production and then continue to introduce these characters within the DCU. So again, we'll see how it goes. Right now, move on to The Brave and the Bold. And I'm actually really excited about this one just because Batman is my personal favorite character in the DC comics. So anything Batman related, I'm going to be really excited for. And the fact that James Gunn and Peter Safran are going to be at the helm of this, I think is going to be really, really exciting. And the film is supposed to explore the members of the Bat family, including the introduction of Batman's son, Damian Wayne, who will serve as the new Robin. And James Gunn said that was supposed to be kind of like a strange father and son story between Batman and Robin. So I think that could be really interesting, especially the fact that Damian is kind of like a crazy junior assassin in a way. Because the whole backstory with this character is that he's actually the biological son of Bruce Wayne and Talia al Ghul. And of course, Talia al Ghul is the daughter of Ra's al Ghul, who's the leader of the League of Shadows. And you've seen the Dark Knight trilogy by Christopher Nolan, you'll see how intense those characters are. But then as the story goes on, Damian kind of embraces the fact that he's Bruce Wayne's son and then eventually becomes a new Robin. So obviously there's like a lot of tension at the beginning, but then they learn to evolve and care about each other and kind of become the new dynamic duo in a way. So I think that'd be really cool. And then especially since we're going to be getting more of the Bat family, it'd be interesting to see if we get like Dick Grayson or Jason Todd or Tim Drake and the other former Robins and how they kind of deal with this kind of new Damian Wayne Robin. And then hopefully we'll also get Jim Gordon and like Barbara Gordon, aka Batgirl, in this storyline as well. So we'll see how it goes. I mean, so far we've just gotten confirmed that Batman and Damian Wayne will be in this story. So I think that could be like good on its own. But yeah, we'll see if we get other members of the Bat family within this film as well. And as far as the version of Batman that'll be introduced in this new DCU, James Gunn said that it's going to be based on the Grant Morrison comic book run of Batman from 2006 to 2013. And it could possibly be based on the whole Batman Son comic book story arc. And in that storyline, we get introduced to the character of Damian Wayne and everything that I said earlier about how Talia al Ghul kind of had this whole mission of bringing Damian Wayne into Batman's life to cause havoc. And obviously Batman growing wise to Talia al Ghul's schemes and fighting against it. And then Damian Wayne kind of rejecting the whole League of Assassins plans for him and then kind of embracing being the son of Batman and then helping him fight crime in Gotham City. So I think that could be a cool premise for a film for sure. Also, it was confirmed that Ben Affleck's version of Batman from the DCEU would not be appearing in this DCU version, which totally makes sense since James Gunn and Peter Safran are pretty much trying to wipe the slate clean of the DCEU and embrace this new DCU with a new iteration of Batman. And it also makes sense because Ben Affleck really wants nothing to do with the DCU anymore, especially after he was treated after Batman and Superman and Justice League and everything like that. So it totally makes sense that they kind of wipe the slate clean from him. Also, that kind of brings up the whole kind of Elseworlds alternate reality for the DCU when it comes to Matt Reeves' Batman and how the Batman doesn't fit within the DCU version. So James Gunn has named everything that's outside of his DCU as Elseworld. So everything with the Batman sequel and with the Penguin series and all those other different series taking place within the Batman universe are part of Elseworlds. And now in the DCU, there's going to be a whole new Batman that James Gunn will be developing, just so that there won't be any confusion with people asking like, okay, why is this Batman here, but this Batman's not part of this continuity and everything. So James Gunn just made the decision to keep it completely separate, just to make it easier for audiences to follow, which totally makes sense. And then in June of 2023, Andy Muschietti was confirmed to be directing the project alongside Barbara Muschietti, who would be serving as producer, as well as James Gunn and Peter Safran. And Andy Muschietti previously directed The Flash, which James Gunn previously said would kind of reset the whole DCU continuity into the DCU continuity. But then in December of 2024, Andy Muschietti said that development on this project was delayed because of his commitments to other projects and to ensure that this project didn't conflict with Matt Reeves' sequel to The Batman, which totally makes sense. But yeah, it's definitely a bummer that we'll have to wait even longer for this movie because I'm definitely really excited for The Brave and the Bold. Like I said before, anything Batman related I'm really excited for. But it's a good thing they didn't have a release date already set, so I don't have to worry about things getting delayed or anything like that. They just have to wait for the movie to be as good as possible and then announce release dates, which I think is definitely the best call for sure. And hopefully that'll mean more attention brought to the Batman sequel to make it as good as possible and to be released on time so that they can finally work on the Brave and the Bold movie and have that be as good as possible before it's released. But overall, I'm really excited for the Brave and the Bold. Hopefully after the Batman sequel is released, more attention can be brought to it and we can kind of get the production going on that again and then get it released as soon as possible, and how this new Batman will fit into this new DCU continuity and how he contributes to the overall DCU. And there's also only been one update with The Brave and the Bold. Back in February of this year, a writer had been hired for the film and was closely working on the script with James Gunn, but Andy Muschietti wasn't actively involved with the project then. But Peter Safran said that he'd be shown the script once it was ready. So again, like with Waller and The Authority, they're struggling to find a good script. But like I said, with those other projects, hopefully those scripting issues will be resolved and they're able to find a good writer and they'll be able to tell the best Batman story within this DCU. And I know James Gunn is a huge Batman fan and this is a character that's really personal to him, so I'm pretty sure he's going to put all of his time and energy into making this script as good as possible. But I'm sure he and the writer will eventually come up with something great and we'll see how it goes. All right, now we move on to Swamp Thing. And like some other projects, this was a character that I wasn't really familiar with until I kind of did more research into the character and the backstory. And yeah, now I'm actually really excited for it. And the official premise is that it's supposed to be kind of like a gothic horror movie that kind of explores the origins of Swamp Thing. And back in December of 2022, James Mangold said that he was actually interested in working on a DC project with James Gunn and Peter Safran. And then in 2023, when James Gunn revealed his slate of the new DC projects, Swamp Thing was one of them. And James Gunn said it would take specific inspiration from Alan Moore's 1984 to 1984 comic book run called The Saga of the Swamp Thing. And that storyline, it talks about the character of Alec Holland, who is a scientist who becomes a Swamp Thing. And actually, after doing more research on it, it was actually a really interesting storyline where he's a scientist in the bayou of Louisiana and he's surrounded by the swamp and he's working on these different experiments and these criminals actually blow up his lab within the swamp and killing him in a way. And his consciousness kind of seeps into the vines of the swamp and they become kind of like a humanoid creature and he becomes kind of like the protector of the green, and how he's trying to turn himself back into a human, but then he realizes that it's actually his consciousness that's in the Swamp Thing creature and his human bones were left behind. And then he finally puts the bones to rest and kind of becomes this anti-hero in a way, kind of protecting the swamp and protecting the green from all these different threats. So it's actually a really cool storyline for sure. And then after the announcement in 2023, James Mangold posted a picture of Swamp Thing on social media, and the next day he was confirmed to be in negotiations to write and direct the movie, but he wasn't expected to start work until after he finished Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny and A Complete Unknown, the Bob Dylan biopic. But now that those movies are finally released, he can finally start working on Swamp Thing. But at the same time, he's also working on a Star Wars project, and he said that he was unsure of which one to produce first. So we'll see what he does with that. Hopefully he does Swamp Thing first, because I'm not really sure what the state of Star Wars is going to be in the next few years. So I think working on a DCU film is probably a better bet, but we'll see what he decides. And James Gunn also described this as a passion project for James Mangold. So maybe that'll kind of entice him more to do Swamp Thing first and then do the Star Wars project. And despite being totally darker than the other DCU projects, James Gunn and Peter Safran said that they're intending it to be interconnected with the rest of the DCU continuity. So yeah, overall, I'm really excited for this project. I don't really know too much about Swamp Thing, but doing more research on it, I think he could be a really interesting character, and it'd be interesting to see how they kind of fit him within the rest of the DCU continuity. Pretty sure it won't be right away. I think this film will probably be more self-contained, and then they'll try to find a way to kind of integrate him more as the movies and TV shows go on. But yeah, I'm excited to see what they do with it and how he fits into the larger DCU. And we've only gotten one update with Swamp Thing. Back in February of this year, it was revealed that the film had been stuck in limbo, while James Mangold focused on his Bob Dylan biopic of Complete Unknown. But now that the movie's finished, he can start focusing on Swamp Thing again. But I also know he's been tapped to direct the Dawn of the Jedi movie for Lucasfilm, so we'll see what he does first. But like I said before, hopefully he does Swamp Thing, and we can kind of get the ball rolling on that. But I know it's probably going to be like years away, so I'm sure he has time to figure out what he wants to do next, and hopefully he makes a decision, and hopefully he chooses Swamp Thing, and hopefully he can start development on that process as soon as possible. All right, now we'll move on to Paradise Lost. And the official premise for the show is that it's supposed to be a political drama about the scheming and power struggles on the all-female island of Themyscira before Wonder Woman was born. So I think that could be really cool. And the title is similar to Paradise Island Lost, which was a 2001 comic series by Phil Jimenez and George Perez about the Civil War in Themyscira. But I was doing research on that storyline, and it was really about Princess Diana and her aunt Hippolyta and the conflict that they have on Paradise Island. And since it's supposed to take place before the birth of Princess Diana, it'd be interesting to see the origins of Themyscira and kind of like the premise says, all the political schemings that happen and how we see in the present day DCU. And I guess one of the bummers is that we won't see the continuation of Wonder Woman from Patty Jenkins and Gal Gadot, because back in December of 2022, Patty Jenkins was revealed to no longer be developing a sequel to Wonder Woman and Wonder Woman 1984 because she was told by James Gunn and Peter Safran that that iteration didn't fit within their new continuity of the DCU. And I feel kind of bad for Gal Gadot because I know that she was saying that she and James Gunn and Peter Safran were in meetings to talk about a potential Wonder Woman 3, but then James Gunn and Peter Safran kind of had to quickly confirm that that wasn't happening and that they're developing a new iteration of the Wonder Woman character and Themyscira. So that's a little bit of a bummer, but hopefully with this new series, they'll be able to embrace a new version of the Themyscirans and the Amazonians, and hopefully as this new DCU continuity continues, they'll be able to introduce a new Wonder Woman into the DCU and hopefully have that character just be as loved as the Gal Gadot version from the DCEU, just because Wonder Woman is definitely one of the best movies of the DCEU. So that's kind of a shame that we won't get to see her iteration in the new DCU continuity, but I think it's a good idea to kind of have it more like as a prequel series, and then as time goes on, eventually introduce a new Princess Diana and then have her be integrated into the new DCU continuity. And Peter Safran and James Gunn also compared this series to Game of Thrones, which totally makes sense, because that show is all about scheming and manipulation and battling and infighting. It's kind of like a sword and sandals kind of story, so I think that'd be really cool for a premise for a show. So we'll see if it goes for multiple seasons or if it's just like a one and done season, but overall I'm really excited for this show and I think it'd be really cool for sure. And we've only gotten one update for Paradise Lost. Back in February of this year, it was revealed that the series is still in development, which is still good news. I'm glad that they're still working on it. It hasn't been stalled for any scripting reasons or director reasons or anything like that. And I'm sure the series is still going to be a long ways away. Like I've been saying before, Peter Safran and James Gunn want to wait till all these scripts for these projects are as good as possible before they start talking about any release dates. So I'm glad they're taking their time with it. Hopefully we won't have to wait too long, because I know that James Gunn said that Wonder Woman is one of the pillars of the DCU. And I know Wonder Woman won't be in this series because this is like a Amazonian prequel series, but just to show the audiences what James Gunn and Peter Safran have in mind for this whole DCU version of Paradise Island and the Amazonians. So we'll see how it goes. But yeah, glad it's still in development and hopefully we'll get more news on it soon. And finally, we have Booster Gold. And the official premise is that Mike Carter / Booster Gold is a disgraced football player from the 25th century who travels back in time to pose as a superhero who uses basic future technology. And yeah, I'm actually really excited about this show too. Again, like I was saying with other DC characters, I didn't really know too much about Booster Gold, but then I went and did research on it. And yeah, he's actually a really interesting character. And the whole reason for that is because his father pretty much told him to intentionally lose football games in order to help him out on different bets. Eventually, the college that he played for kind of caught on to his different schemes and they kicked him out of the football team. So he was kind of looking around for odd jobs and then finally took a job at the science lab and then kind of got introduced to this robot character to work with who introduced him to all these kind of like different forms of technology. And basically he used that technology, like I said in the premise, to go back in time in order to pose as a superhero while using the technology in order to gain fame and fortune, and kind of became a selfish character in a way. But then as time goes on, he has different personal tragedies, he loses his sister and, he kind of learns to embrace being a responsible hero, eventually joins the Justice League and kind of becomes a valuable member of the DC universe. So I think that'd be cool to kind of see like his kind of early stages of being a superhero, but really just kind of fooling the public into thinking that he has superpowers and creating all this kind of like mischief and mayhem in order to gain all this fame and fortune. So I think that'd be really interesting. And James Gunn and Peter Safran pretty much said this is going to be like an outright comedy for the DCU, which totally makes sense. I feel like Booster Gold is kind of like a Star-Lord character in a way, which is perfect for James Gunn, since he wrote and directed the Guardians of the Galaxy trilogy, so I'm pretty sure he's going to put a lot of that influence in Booster Gold, where he's this kind of like childlike loser in a way, and who's always just trying to like make pop culture references and pretend that he's a hero in some way. And then as time goes on, he actually goes through like actual trials and tribulations, and actually kind of matures as a hero, learns to not be selfish, learns to actually kind of care about other people, and then maybe eventually join Superman and Batman and all these different characters and become an actual hero within the DCU. So I think that could be really cool for sure. And we already know that James Gunn has a lot of comedy chops, especially his characters in The Suicide Squad and Peacemaker and all those other projects and stuff like that. So it's going to be funny, it's going to be emotional, it's going to be action packed. So yeah, I'm really excited for this series, and we don't really have any confirmation of like when it's going to come out, but yeah, I'm sure as time goes on we'll get more announcements, like casting announcements and like when they're filming and then in post-productions and things like that. So yeah, I'm really excited for this show and can't wait to see what happens with it. And there's only been one update for Booster Gold. Back in February of this year, a showrunner had expressed interest in taking on the project, but ultimately had to pass on it, which is kind of unfortunate. I'm guessing they have a script already locked in, but now they're just trying to find a showrunner to bring to life. So hopefully James Gunn and Peter Safran can find the best showrunner they can to bring this show to life and just make it the best series that it can be. So we'll see how that goes. All right, I guess let's sort of wrap up this video. I've been talking way longer than I thought it would be, but yeah, I'm just really excited about this new DCU. When they first announced that it was going to be happening, like I was actually really excited just because the DCEU was pretty disappointing. I mean, there was a couple movies here and there that were pretty good, but overall it just wasn't really the tone that I was really wanting for the DC universe. So the fact that James Gunn and Peter Safran are coming in and kind of wiping the slate clean of the DCEU and creating this new DCU continuity, I think is a really good call for sure. And love James Gunn ever since the first Guardians of the Galaxy movie. I kind of went back and saw his other movies previously. I like Slither. I haven't seen Super, but I definitely will check it out soon. I know that's kind of like a cult classic, so I'll definitely check that out for sure. But yeah, I love the Guardians of the Galaxy movies. And then when he left Marvel to go to DC and did The Suicide Squad, I really love that movie. He just has a really good job in embracing all the weirdo characters and these really obscure characters from these different comic books and having an audience fall in love with them. And he did it with Guardians of the Galaxy, like no one knew who those characters were. And then now everyone loves Star-Lord and Gamora and Drax and Rocket and Groot. So I'm pretty sure he'll do that with all these different DCU movies coming. Obviously he'll have like the heavy hitters, Superman, Batman, all them, but he'll have all these kind of obscure characters, like Swamp Thing, Clayface, The Authority, all these characters that I personally don't really know too much about, but I know like the hardcore comic book fans really know about. So it's cool that we're kind of getting a good balance of characters that people already know and love, and then characters that people don't really know at all, and then have James Gunn embrace them and bring them to the mainstream. So I'm definitely really excited for the new DCU. Creature Commandos is pretty good. Peacemaker is really cool too. And of course, like I'm super excited for Superman, especially have that trailer, and then we'll see how the other movies and TV shows do in the future. But yeah, so far I'm really positive about the new DCU, and I think James Gunn and Peter Safran are going to do a really good job, and we'll see how the movies and TV shows do once they come out. But so far they're doing pretty good. So I think they have a good plan in place. They're embracing the fact that they want to have the scripts as good as possible before going into production, and they don't have release dates set in stone, before even writing a script, which, a couple other studios have done and it hasn't really had the best results. So I think these two guys are definitely going to approach the new DCU with like a lot of love, a lot of care, a lot of intelligence behind it, and yeah, make something great. So yeah, overall, you've already heard me say it before, but yeah, I'm really excited for this and can't wait to see what happens. So yeah, thank you so much for watching this video. What movie or TV show from the new DCU continuity are you looking forward to? Be sure to let me know in the comments below. Make sure you give this video a like and subscribe for more videos, and I'll see you next time. Bye.